Hello and welcome to Interprepedia. My name is Rosa. I'm an interpreter, and in this video, I am going to share with you my experience taking the oral portion of the Federal Court Interpreting Certification. I took this exam a few months ago for the first time and I passed. So now I'd like to share with you details about the new test format and all the things I wish I would have known before taking the test. Before we start, I'd like to invite you to check out some resources related to the federal certification. If you haven't watched it yet, a couple of years ago, I made a video about the written exam of the federal certification. Also, there's a useful YouTube tutorial about the new computer-based oral exam by Prometric, and of course, the FCICE examinee handbook. I will include those links in the description box. Also, I'd like to invite you to visit Interprepedia's blog and to subscribe to the email list so you can be the first to know when new posts are published, because I share information there that I don't necessarily share here. And for example, I wrote a blog post about my experience taking the oral exam right after I took it, but the YouTube video is coming out months later. In this video, I'll share with you details about the 2022 pilot program and Prometric's registration and checking process. I'll of course go over the exam structure section by section, and I'll share with you the things I wish I would have known beforehand. I'll also go over the passing score and important statistics about this exam. And finally, I'll share my thoughts about the test. So to give you some context about the timeline, the federal certification usually takes place in a 2-year period. First, you have to take the written exam, and once you pass, you are able to take the oral exam the following year. I took the written exam back in 2020, and technically the oral exam was supposed to be offered in 2021, but it wasn't. There was radio silence from 2020 until the summer of 2022, and we had no idea when the oral exam was going to be offered. Then, during the NAGIT conference in June of 2022, the administrative office announced they would be offering the oral exam under a pilot program later on that summer. That pilot program was available for up to 200 candidates, and what they were putting to the test was a new exam delivery format because it is now a fully computer-based exam administered by Prometric. There is no longer a proctor. The exam structure, however, remained exactly the same as it was. Something to keep in mind when you register for this exam is that it is not available at all Prometric locations. You may need to travel to a different city or state to take the test. So make sure your search area is wide enough if you can't find the test available at any of the centers near you. For example, I live in Orlando, Florida, where there are a few Prometric locations nearby, but I had to travel down to Miami, which is about 3 hours away, to take this test. This year, the cost of this exam was $310. Skipping right to the day of the test. Once you arrive in Prometric, they will verify your government-issued photo ID, so don't forget to bring it. They will give you a locker and key to store your belongings. You'll move on to a secondary check where they pat you down and check you with a metal detector, and then you'll get your writing tools, and they'll take you to a private room to take the test. The writing tools that they'll give you are pen and pencil and 16 blank pages for you to take notes. Now, the paper they'll give you is just like this, and yes, it is blue. As you can see, it's a bifold, so it has 4 pages because you can write front and back. They will give you 4 of these. For me, this was enough to take notes during the consecutive section. They told me that if I needed more pages, I would have to wave at the proctor and wait for them to bring me more paper. But considering this is a timed test, if you do that, you risk running out of time. So I would not recommend it. I could not find a better picture online to show you the room where you'll be taking the test, but it will probably be something like this. As you can see in the back of the picture, there's a little room behind a desk, and you can see through a glass window. That's what my test room looked like, and it was right behind the Prometric proctor's desk. It is not soundproof, so you may hear whatever is going on outside, and since there's a big glass window next to you, it can be a little distracting. Once you are escorted to your test room, they will turn on the computer and they'll ask you to test the sound by using a recording tool on screen. When you do this, make sure you hear the playback of your recording because you may see the sound wave moving when you speak, but if you can't hear your voice in the recording playing back, there could be a problem with the audio. And if that's the case, you won't realize it until the third section of the test, which is the first simultaneous section, because there's no audio for the first two, which are sight translations. And by then, restarting the test or stopping to fix audio issues may not be an option. Once you're ready to start, you'll have 15 minutes to review the test instructions. Use this time to breathe, to become familiar with the layout of the screen and with the location of the buttons that you'll have to click on, and calm your nerves so you can do really great during the test. The first section of the test is the English to Spanish sight translation. As soon as you click on the button to start this section, two side-by-side screens, just like these, will pop up. The text you'll have to sight translate will be on the left, and the screen on the right is where you can see the audio capture bar and, most importantly, the countdown at the top of the screen where the yellow arrow is pointing. The text was very easy to read. I found that the size of the font they used and the spacing between lines was adequate. Make sure to look if there's a green box at the bottom corner where the green arrow is pointing, because that will tell you if you need to keep scrolling down to see the entire text. You'll have 5 minutes total to read, process, and sight translate a 230-word text. One disadvantage of not having a human proctor is that you have to keep track of time on your own. For your reference, when I was studying for the exam, I was usually really fast to sight translate similar texts, and I usually had between 30 to 45 seconds left out of the 5 minutes. But for the actual exam, I barely made it on time. I literally had 1 or 2 seconds left in each sight translation. I think that was because I took a bit longer to read the text to make sure I understood everything before I started with the sight translation. But anyway, it's something I advise you to keep in mind. Also, you'll be recorded from the moment this section starts. So whatever you mumble or say while you're reading the text for comprehension will remain in the recording. So keep that in mind. There are 22 scoring units in each of the sight translation sections, equivalent to 10% of the overall score. After the English to Spanish comes the Spanish to English sight translation, but obviously the format is the same, so this explanation applies to both. After the second sight translation from Spanish to English comes the simultaneous monologue at 120 words per minute, where you'll have to interpret 840 words in 7 minutes. Although obviously all sections of the test are important, this one is the second most important in terms of points because there are 65 scoring units, equivalent to 29% of the overall score. One thing to keep in mind is that the audio does not start playing automatically when you start this section. You have to press play for it to start. So press play promptly when you land on that screen. Before you have to start interpreting, you'll hear a recording with instructions for 45 seconds, intended to give you time to adjust the volume if needed. I found this section to be manageable. The quality of the recording was great. And whenever I heard a proper noun of a person or location, or whenever I heard a number, they were clearly pronounced. I don't know if this happened to you, but one thing I struggled with while I was practicing was with proper nouns, because in many practices, the person who recorded them butchered the names or pronounced them in a very strange way, which threw me off. Fortunately, that did not happen here, so I was really happy. After the first simultaneous section comes the consecutive interpretation. Here I found that time was my worst enemy because you only get 20 minutes to interpret about 900 words split into approximately 50 utterances that are up to 50 words long. This is the section of the test with the most scoring units because it has 75, equivalent to 36% of the overall score. You are allowed to request 2 repetitions. Word of advice, don't take too long to click through once you complete your rendition, and keep an eye on the timer and on your progress. I found that most utterances were actually very manageable in terms of length. The voice actors who recorded the exam spoke very clearly and at a very good pace. There were only 2 or 3 utterances that were challenging for me because of their length and the amount of details I had to convey, but other than that, it was good. The utterances will play automatically, and the system starts recording you automatically as soon as the utterance is played. But one thing that threw me off was the fact that I had to click through 2 different buttons to move on to the next utterance. At first, I would just stare at the screen for a couple of seconds, kind of hesitating to click because I was afraid I would accidentally skip an utterance and miss those points. Then I got the hang of it and I felt more confident, so I was moving a bit more quickly, but I forgot to keep track of my progress. And when I looked at the timer and I realized I still had about a dozen utterances left and only a few minutes, I don't remember how many minutes exactly I had left, but I had to really rush to finish on time. And the 20 minutes were up right when I was in the middle of the very last utterance. And by the way, I only asked for one of the 2 repetitions allowed. This is what the screen looks like in the consecutive section. You need to pay attention at the 2 areas that I circled in red because that's where you'll find the timer that shows you how much time you have left and it shows what utterance you are interpreting. The last section of the test is the simultaneous Q&A at 160 words per minute. You'll have to interpret 600 words in 5 minutes. There are 35 scoring units in this section, equivalent to 16% of the overall score. Like the other simultaneous section, the audio does not start playing automatically, so you'll have to press play promptly, and you'll also have 45 seconds to make whatever adjustment you may need. This section was fast and furious. For me, it was the most difficult part of the test because it's very fast and the vocabulary was very technical. It was super dense. And by then, I was already a bit tired. But one thing that helped me push through was the fact that I remembered that there are only 35 scoring units in total here. That means that there's 1 scoring unit for every 17 words, give or take. To pass this exam, you need to achieve a score of 80%. I've heard some people argue that it's 75%, but no, it's 80%, and you can confirm it by reviewing the examinee handbook. Also, for some reason, the letter I received with my score stated that the passing score was 79%, but I guess that was a typo because that is not the passing score. Also, unlike most oral exams at the state level, there is no breakdown of your score per section. They only give you an overall score. In that sense, I find that the federal exam offers an advantage compared to the state exam because if for some reason you don't do great, let's say in one of the sites, but the rest of the test is great, you have a chance to pass. Now, I always heard that this test was so hard that only 5% of those who take it pass. And I believed it, like most interpreters I know. I don't know how many of us took the pilot test, but I know that 46 of us passed Assuming that about 200 candidates took it, that would mean that around 23% passed. There was a bit of an outrage in the industry among veteran colleagues who were questioning why there were so many of us who passed. So I'll show you some statistics that may set the record straight. In the book Fundamentals of Court Interpretation by Dueñas, Gonzalez, Vasquez, and Mickelson, you'll find a section about the history of the FCICE that includes some statistics. The statistics are from decades ago, but nonetheless, they reflect real numbers, of course. If we look at this table, between 1980 and 1999, over 18,000 candidates started the certification process and only 826 accomplished it. So, yes, that is equivalent to 5%. Now, what the previous table did not show was that, yes, over 18,000 started the certification process by taking the written exam, which is the first step. Now, if you look at the number of candidates who actually took the oral exam, you'll see that it was just over 4,000 and 826 passed it. So that is equivalent to around 20%, not 5%, for the oral exam. We see a similar trend here in the statistics from the year 2000 to 2009. Over 4,000 started the certification process and only 8% completed it. But if we take into consideration that among those who started the process, only 1,916 actually took the oral test and 368 passed, we'll see that again, the percentage of those who passed the oral test was 20%. So, yes, the overall pass rate of this certification as a whole is under 10%, but that is considering all the candidates who started and make it to the end. The pass rate of the oral exam is around 20%. If you go back and look closely at the numbers, you'll see that the written exam has a lower pass rate than the oral exam. And I can tell you that for me, the written exam was a lot harder than the oral one. As final thoughts, I can share with you that this was one of the best experiences I've had taking a test, if not the best. It was a difficult test, but most of all, it was a fair test. The quality of the recordings was impeccable. The voice actors did an amazing job. The scripts were relevant and realistic. The display and configuration of the screens, now that it's computer based, was very good. Although I feel there's some slight room for improvement there because now that there is no proctor having to click through the screens on our own adds a bit of time. When you finish the test, you'll probably read on the final screen that it takes 90 days for you to get your scores. I took my test on August 1st, which was the very first day they offered the pilot, and my score letter was issued on October 31st. You'll get that score letter in the mail and probably an email around the same time. One thing I learned is that candidates are not supposed to call themselves federally certified until they get their official certificate. So hold your horses and don't order new business cards or update your email signature right after you get your score letter. There will be some back and forth between the candidates who passed and the administrative office to get you to confirm your name and other information so they can update the federally certified interpreters registry and issue your certificate. I got my certificate in the mail in late January of 2023, so close to the 3-month mark after I got my score letter. Anyway, that was about all I could think of sharing with you about this test. Remember to visit and subscribe to Interprepedia's blog at interprepedia.com because there are things that I post there much sooner than I do here. Please share your questions or comments because I'll be looking forward to reading them. And if you are taking this test, study hard and prepare as best as you can. I hope you do really, really great. And thank you so much for watching. Adios.